Hey everyone, in today's video I just wanted to speak about some less commonly spoke about fears when it comes to homosexual OCD. Now, as many of you know, that was my main theme, and it caused a lot of suffering for me over a long period of time. And of course, with HOCD, there's lots of fears that typically get covered by myself and the other coaches on the channel. So the fear of rejection, the fear of living a lie, the fear of fear, the actual fear of being gay, and all of those sorts of fears. There's also some other fears which aren't typically covered, which I'm going to recover today. And some of these fears can actually play a key role in driving the suffering when on the HOCD journey. So yeah, let's get into some of those now. Excuse me. So one of the main fears when it comes to HOCD that aren't typically talked about is the actual fear of losing attraction. So of course there is the fear of being gay, fear of being attracted to the same sex, but there's also the fear of losing attraction to the sex that you want to feel attracted to, aka the opposite sex. And especially with men, and especially in life, we put a lot of weightage and importance on sexual relations, because it feels good, the sensation of intimacy, the sensation of sex, having that as part of our life feels very good. And just being sexual beings, we pride and we treasure our sexual attraction. If we were living a life without any of that sort of sexual vitality, then yeah, it'd be a pretty sort of bland life without that sort of maybe that color and the excitement that we have. All right, so yeah, we put a lot of emphasis on that. There could also be the element of our feeling manly, and it comes in with the acceptance and potentially the societal rejection of others, where we want to feel like we're good with women and we have attracted to women, and just to fit in with our friends when that comes up in conversation. There is that element too. So actually losing that attraction can feel quite humiliating. It can feel quite shameful, and it can feel like we're losing a part of us that we once knew and enjoyed. And it can be very difficult because like I said, we really sort of want to enjoy that part of our life, and we have to sort of accept that maybe we will miss out on that. We have to accept that maybe that part is not going to come back. And it's almost like when you accept that, you're letting go of a part of yourself that you once had. And it's very, very difficult to actually do that, especially when you put a lot of emphasis on sexual relationships. So there is that element that we have to be aware of. And then if we did lose that attraction, it comes down to the fear of being unhappy forever. Okay, and in time it's realizing that even if we did lose attraction to the sex that we want to feel attracted to, then it still wouldn't be the end of the world, right? For example, there are good analogies we can use here. So young children, pre-puberty, who haven't had any sexual attraction yet. You see a lot of children who are still very, very happy without having sexual attraction towards other people. They're running around, playing in the playground, being at school. You can be very happy without that. Also, older people who don't necessarily have high levels of sexual attraction to the sex that they want, they get by, they can still see family, they can still eat, they can still do basic things in life to a large extent. And there's also like times where some men have lost their attraction to women. For example, I know like a friend of a friend whose dad had testicular cancer, and he had one of his testicles removed, and he objectively lost his attraction to women just because there's less hormones going on in there. And I've met him a few times and I spoke with him about it, and he said he's actually just very grateful to be alive and to not be going through the cancer and the treatment anymore, even though it's meant that he's not got a testicle anymore, right? So it kind of shows that area of gratitude, and that we can still get by even without those feelings of attraction, right? So yeah, when on the HOCD journey, I really had to let go of that demand to feel that attraction. I had to imagine that it was never going to come back. I had to imagine that I was never ever going to feel attracted to a woman again. I had to really come to terms with that and make peace with that on a deeper level. And like I said, it was very sticky. It was very hard because I put, sexual intimacy and relationships on that pedestal. But I had to learn to take that down. I had to learn to bring it down, see it in the context of one's life, and seeing, well, it's not actually the end of the world, even if this never comes back. So yeah, that's very, very key when it comes to that. And I remember there would be times, because I didn't feel that attraction, I would just avoid. So I'd avoid dating, I'd avoid opportunities and nights out with women. But even in those moments, I had to still try and force myself and push myself in that regard and not avoid that. I had to feel like I was living a lie. I had to feel like I was living a bit of a fraud and go towards that behaviourally, because otherwise OCD held the upper hand, because it said, you can't have these things that you want until you've recovered, until it feels right. And that just gave OCD all the cards. So I had to break the mold and go through the fire there, even when it felt like I lost my attraction, even when it felt like I was living a lie. Okay. The second fear is being left by your partner, right? So because of that loss of attraction and because of that general uncertainty around, whether you're, feeling attracted to your partner, what might happen is you start becoming a bit off in the relationship, right? Maybe you avoid, maybe the sex and intimacy goes down because you don't want to expose yourself to that lack of feeling. Perhaps you want to avoid as well because you're getting intrusive images in your mind. And that can just lead to the relationship with the partner becoming strained, right? And that can sort of filter into sexual issues as well, performance issues, because you feel very stressed in that moment. The sexual performance might go down because you're very much in your own head. You might not necessarily be able to give your partner what they want. So, the other partner can pick up on that and they can sense that potentially something's off. And then because they recognize that, what happens is you put yourself under more pressure to perform well, and it just heightens those feelings of uncertainty and lack of attraction because it knows that you don't want it there because there's a threat from the partner. And then what can happen is that can, over time, that can lead to a breakdown in the relationship and lead to your partner actually leaving you because they're not being satisfied, or they sense that you're not right in the relationship, or that something's off. So that fear of loss of the relationship, with HOCD can really drive some of these these uncertainty sensations, these avoidance tendencies, and that pressure on yourself to be a good partner, so to speak. All right. So again, it's very important that in these moments, when there is that fear quite sort of high, maybe you really value the relationship and you want to keep on to that, and OCD is going to reinforce the things you don't want. It's so important that you do still try and fulfill your end of the deal. So whether it's intimacy, whether it's still going towards your partner, whether it's still trying to be the best partner that you can even whilst you feel uncertain. And there's going to have to be ways in which you improvise. So for example, if you feel like you're not getting that excitement in the bedroom, there's going to be other things you have to do. So maybe you can improvise, foreplay, etc. There's going to have to be a way around it where you still try and go towards that even when it feels wrong, because just OCD or not, generally speaking, if your partner's on the other end of that, they're going to be feeling quite dissatisfied, and they might use that as a reason to leave. So I think whilst you go against that behaviourally, or sorry, whilst you go towards that behaviourally, it's so important to realise that, well, even if my partner did leave me off the back of this, whilst it wouldn't be ideal, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Even when I am alone, I can have more time for myself. I can, have more freedom to do the things that I want to do. Maybe I'll save some more money. And it's a good exposure to, when you are with your partner, going out to do things by yourself. So whether it's, going to a cinema, going to a restaurant, going out with your friends, not having your whole life sort of dictated by what your partner's doing, of course, which is healthy anyway. You need to try and get in the habit of doing that and exposing yourself to that feeling of being alone, and realizing that even if the partner did leave you off the back of that, of course it wouldn't be ideal. Maybe before HOCD set in, you had those feelings and you felt connected and you felt attracted. Of course OCD is going to switch that off, but you still need to make sure that you do try and go towards that, and in those moments having compassion for yourself, right? Because it feels very, very tough when you feel uncertain, you feel like you're in limbo, and those feelings are very much switched off. It feels like you're living your worst nightmare in those moments. And just being with your partner itself, there is going to be an exposure, especially with living a lie and being in those intimate moments as well. So you need to take the pressure off yourself to feel that certain way. Still try and push through as best as you can, and realize that even people who aren't going through this cycle, they can still be left by their partners, right? It's not a exemption that we have just because we're going through this journey. Anyone could be left by their partner at any time. So it's important to remember that and try and cultivate that compassion for yourself. Okay, and then the next one is the fear of actually being in limbo, the fear of being in no man's land. So I remember there was a time in my journey where I was so uncertain and I was so fed up of not knowing. I would have preferred to have just had an answer whether I'm gay, whether I'm straight, and I'd prefer to have just known. If that meant I was gay and it stopped the uncertainty, then so be it. I was so sick and tired of doing the compulsions. I was so sick and tired of trying to chase that certainty. There came a point where I would have just taken an answer just to put me out of my misery, right? But of course, with OCD, we're never going to get that 100% bolted down certainty. So we have to get comfortable with that sensation of uncertainty. We have to get comfortable being in limbo, all right? And when that's hanging around, it can make it very difficult to make decisions on what we should do with our romantic life. You know, should we be with this partner? Should I be with that partner? Should I move things forward in the relationship? Should we move in together because I feel uncertain? All these different things. Should should we buy this house? Should we do this? And all of the time, whilst that's there with that uncertainty sensation, it's going to feel very, very difficult to make that next step. All right. So again, what I'd say is, look, if you're in that position where, you know, you're with the partner and, you know, you're scared of being uncertain, do I push my relationship forward? Do we, you know, take the next step? I think it's very, very important that you sort of try just to take the pressure off yourself to figure that out in the moment and still try and push forward as best you can anyway, right? I'm not saying that as an exposure you just have to suddenly move out with your partner, but it's very important that your life will look like how you want it to look like if you wasn't going through this cycle. So, you know, if gradually you was, you know, moving towards living together, if you was moving towards, you know, having a family and children, if you're moving towards, you know, sharing your life together, that's genuinely what you're going to have to do. And yes, like I said, it's going to feel uncertain. It's going to feel like you need to know that with that absolute certainty before you make that decision. But ironically, you're never going to know. So it's so important that as best as you can, and with, you know, whilst working on the belief systems and the behaviours when you're on the journey, you still try and push your life forward in that general direction as best as you can. And it's going to feel like you're living a lie. It's going to feel like you're taking a massive risk. It's going to feel like when you know, you're moving together, or, you know, you tie the knot in the relationship, it's going to feel like the wrong thing. It's going to feel like you should be in a relationship with somebody of the same sex instead. It's going to feel like you're in the wrong relationship. All of that is going to have to be worn as best as you can, while still making sure that you go towards that and breaking down the fears with unconditional self and life acceptance. AKA, even if I was, you know, even if I did make the wrong decision with somebody in my relationship, even if I did move into a new house with somebody who I wasn't that into, you know, would that really be the end of the world? Even if I, you know, I was with this person and I ended up like losing that relationship, or losing the house, or, you know, losing everything that we built together because this, you know, because I was suddenly gay and I realised I was attracted to the same sex. All of those things are going to have to be broken down with unconditional life acceptance, and realising that if these things did happen, it wouldn't actually be the end of the world, and that you could adjust and you could adapt to that, and you know, the world would keep spinning, and whilst you still were air in your lungs, you could you know, take the right course of action going forward. All right, so try not to see it as this final thing. You know, when you've made the decision to tie the knot of the relationship, or when you made the decision to move out, or when you made the decision to sort of get a dog, like, it doesn't have to be this final decision. You can make that call, you know, make the decision, make sure you're still working on your compulsions and avoidance behaviors, and then down the line, if you have to change course and you realize that maybe that's not the right thing to do, and that you know, your actual fear could be true, that you are attracted to somebody of the same sex, then, you know, what would stop you from changing course there? You know, you've got to stop looking at it as sort of this gay or straight thing. Like, it's about being more rational about the worst case scenarios, okay? And as you become more rational about that, you know, the byproduct of that is going to be the way that you feel. And we're not saying that you're just going to be able to see the woods from the trees, but, you know, the more that you're embroiled in these, you know, this cycle of compulsions and avoidance behaviors, and, you know, not making those right steps in the relationship, the more that you're, you know, the more likely you're just going to let, you know, OCD fester. You know, as Albert Ellis says, we feel the way we think, we act the way we feel, and we think the way we act. So the more chance that you're going towards that behaviourally and getting comfortable with that discomfort whilst working on the belief systems, who knows? Who's to say that you're not going to be able to see the woods from the trees a bit more clearly going forward? But yeah, like I said, it's so important that you just wear that discomfort. Like I said, you don't have to rush into those things in the relationship, but it's just important to be aware that those subtle little avoidance behaviours where you feel like you're in limbo and you don't want to push forward, that could also be driving the cycle. So just think about that, okay? You don't need to act on so urgently in the moment, even if you was, you know, in the wrong relationship, even if you was just in this uncertainty sensation that was stopping you feeling attraction to your partner. You know, it's not the sudden urgent thing. You don't need to figure it out right now. You can sit with that for the time being, and if it means, you know, sort of 6 months go down the line and you still, you know, you still feel the same, and you know, nothing changes, even though you've dropped all your compulsions and avoidance behaviors, then yeah, maybe we change the course of action. But yeah, it's just that sudden urgency that you need to get out of that. All right, we don't need to act so urgently in the moment there. And then yeah, other fears as well. So the fear of not having family and kids, right? So a lot of the fears I see with, you know, coaching people with HOCD is, oh, I really wanted to have children, and obviously if I was gay, then you wouldn't be able to have children per se, because you wouldn't have obviously the wife to have the children. Of course, I know you can adopt children nowadays, but from the sort of the main standpoint of not having a family and kids, then HOCD would put a spanner in the works there more than likely. So again, it's accepting that we don't have to have kids, and that our life is actually all right without kids. And it's about seeing the pros and cons of having children as well. Of course, there's lots of pros of children. You have lots of happy times together. The love and affection you feel for them. There's also lots of disadvantages to that, right? So the money that it costs, the extra life pressure and stresses that it creates on top of work and everything else. So it's realizing that even if your life didn't pan out in the way that you thought, it's not the end of the world. And it's realizing that even without HOCD, there are still people out there who aren't able to have kids, right? There's maybe men with low sperm count. There's maybe women who can't get pregnant for whatever reason. So, IVF treatments as well. So it's realizing that even if this wasn't a thing, this doesn't just guarantee that you're going to have kids anyway. Even if you're never able to have children because you realize that your sexuality was your sexuality was towards someone of the same sex, then that's okay. It's not the absolute life-defining thing that we absolutely have to have. And it's realizing that life isn't always going to go to plan. There's going to be lots of unexpected twists, lots of unexpected turns. Just holding anything with that rigidity, my life must work out in that way. Of course, that's going to be a problem. So yeah, think about having kids in that more rational standpoint, and bringing down the catastrophic thinking about if you never had children. That's going to be so important. And then also, that another one with HOCD is the fear of shame, right? And especially for me, I had lots of shame around myself, even if I was homosexual. I saw it as this self-humiliating thing. I thought, if I'm gay, then there's something wrong with me. I'm not normal, and there was lots of shame actually around that. And I felt quite embarrassed, especially when doing my shame attacks, my HOCD exposure. I felt, that really sharp sense of that judgment from other people, the low sense of self-worth. Also a bit threatened as well, because I know there were some people who don't always agree with homosexuality. So when I did some of my exposures, I almost felt like I was looking over my shoulder, because I was scared of, maybe what if other people come for me because they think badly of me, right? So there's lots of negative associations with that. But I had to see that the shame was self-created, right? It was that self-humiliation that I was putting upon myself based on a certain outcome. And I had to try and come at it with that angle of compassion to say, even if I was gay, how could I still come to terms with myself and accept myself as a fallible human, where more than likely it wasn't in my control? Because, if homosexuality was in our control, more than likely people wouldn't just choose to be gay. How do we know? Because there's gay Muslims, for example, and objectively their religion says they shouldn't be gay, but whereas some people are, aka Mormons. So it kind of shows how that compassion should come in there. If I was made in a way that made me gay, then what could I do? What sense would it be to fight myself over that? Because there'd be nothing that I could do about that. All right. So yeah, it's important to see that. And then there can be the religious aspects here as well. If I was gay, this completely goes against my religion. I'm being sinful. What are sort of people in my community and the religious people around me going to think about that? And again, whilst that is completely valid to feel that way, it's also realizing that you could in time still try and cultivate that sense of compassion and acceptance for yourself, as hard as that would be. Especially, I know it's hard with the societal pressures, religious pressures saying that you shouldn't be this way, you must be that way. But again, those societal beliefs and demands overlook the fallibility of a human who can scientifically have inclinations to be attracted to the same sex. Just the reality of it. No amount of societal sort of rejections and demands is going to override that scientific element there. So again, I know it's difficult where we have those different angles of the shame coming in, but again, how we deal with that is really coming to terms with ourselves as a fallible human. Try not to hold societal standards and religious standards so rigidly with 100% rigidity in all cases, because otherwise OCD is gonna have a field day. And it's realizing that across the board, societal standards, religion, there actually can be some leeway and flexibility there. Again, how do we know? You look at Momin, he's homosexual and he's religious, right? So there clearly is some flexibility there that is evident for people to see, right? So yeah, it's important to realise that slowly over a period of time, and it's important to realise that these subtle fears that I've been through, so the fear of losing the attraction, the fear of being left by your partner, the fear of being in limbo, the fear of not having family, kids, and the fear of shame, All of these elements are so important when it comes to, tackling HOCD. So it's really important that whilst you tackle those main fears, the rejection, the actual fear of being gay, the fear of living a lie, etc., it's so important to look at these other fears that are subtly chipping away under the surface and breaking them down with unconditional self and life acceptance.